Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your patience. It's great to see so many of you joining us today. And thank you for introducing yourselves in the chat. I can see we've got panelists and attendees from all over the world. So welcome. And we're very excited to be presenting this workshop on peer review in scholarly journals. My name is Linda Fick, and I'm the managing editor of the South African Journal of Science, affectionately called SAJS. SAJS is the flagship journal of the Academy of Science of South Africa, or ASSAF. And we are excited to host this workshop today because, of course, peer review is a very important topic and a very important aspect of scholarly journals. This month, September, we also celebrate Peer Review Week, which is an annual global week that recognizes the value of peer review. This year's theme is peer review and the future of publishing, to highlight the changing publishing landscape and the ongoing vital role of peer review in shaping scholarly communication. And I hope that this workshop highlights for you the value of peer review and its role in an evolving publishing landscape, and also clarifies any misconceptions on the process that any of us might have. We are very privileged to be joined by a group of experts today, many of whom I have the privilege of working with, and they are going to tell us what we need to know about peer review. And I'm going to introduce them to you later, just before they speak. I just want to mention a few housekeeping rules. This is a webinar, so you will not be able to turn on your mics or your cameras. The webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be shared with all who registered for this workshop. You are welcome to put your comments, general comments, into the chat. But if you have any questions for the panelists, please do put those in the Q&A. If anyone is joining us via YouTube, please don't worry. You can post your questions on the chat in YouTube, and my colleague Louise is monitoring those questions and will share them with us. Also assisting me behind the cameras here is Nadia and Pumlani, my colleagues from the SAJS. And now, before we begin, I would like to give you a chance to tell us what you already know about peer review. So we have a few polls which we will be sharing with you for you to participate in. And I see Nadia has put the first poll up, so I'm asking you to please pop your answers in, and yeah, looking forward to the results. Okay, the answers are coming in. I'm not sure if anybody is joining us via YouTube. But for those who are, in case you can't see, the questions in the poll are: how many papers have you peer reviewed on your own? And the purpose of peer review is to fact check and correct the paper, improve the quality of the paper, check for ethical issues, evaluate the writing style, recommend acceptance or rejection. So thank you for those who are responding. We've got about almost 70%. So we'll just give you a minute longer. So hopefully these polls give us an idea of what we all here participating in the workshop know about peer review, and our panelists hopefully will be able to clarify our misconceptions and our thoughts about peer review. So I think we've got a good response rate. Maybe we can end it there, Nadia, and share the results. So hopefully you can all see, in terms of how many papers, 50% have not reviewed at all yet. So hopefully this workshop will be the instigator for you to become peer reviewers. And actually 11% have reviewed more than 10 papers. So it seems like we have some proficient peer reviewers with us as well. And then the purpose of peer review, 45% said fact check and correct the paper. 86% improve the quality of the paper. So that's most of us. 56% said check for ethical issues, 39% evaluate the writing style, and 57% recommend acceptance or rejection. So hopefully if we relook at this poll at the end of the meeting, we can see where we were right. But thank you for sharing your answers. So we can, without any further preamble, I'm going to introduce the first speaker, Professor Gemma Finch. Gemma is an associate professor in geography at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. She has a PhD from the University of York. She is a paleocologist by training and uses plant and animal remains preserved in sediments to understand past climate and environmental change. Gemma is an NRF C2 rated scientist, is the recipient of the 2021 UKZN Vice Chancellor's Research Award, and has special interests in fieldwork-based training and in developing scientific writing skills. She is, I'm glad to say, also an associate editor of the South African Journal of Science in archaeology, anthropology, and paleontology. So thank you, Gemma, for joining us today, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Linda. And thanks so much for the invitation to speak today. Hopefully you can all share my screen or see my screen.
Yes.
Great. So it's my task today to introduce this topic of peer review and really to highlight some of the main roles of peer review and also some misconceptions regarding what it is not. So to keep things nice and interactive, I would also like to start with an interactive activity. This is a Menti brainstorming exercise, and the idea is to gain an idea of your perceptions of peer review. So the question I'm posing to you is, what is the one word that springs to mind when you think of peer review or the peer review process? Now, to participate in this, I need you to take out your phones and scan that QR code. I can see some people are already ahead of the game here. So you can scan that QR code with your phone camera. And if you have any issues with that, you can also go straight to menti.com and enter the code. Now, you can enter the same word more than once. So if you agree with anything you see on screen, you're welcome to submit multiple responses. But this is a really fun way to gauge people's perspectives on the peer review process. And the larger the words are, the more prominent they are. In other words, the more people who are giving that particular response. So we've got quality and rejection leading the race here, which is interesting. And given that there's so many participants, it's quite fun and enlightening, I think, to see how I can see the long process there, which I think we can probably, many of us can relate to. I wonder if there's a way to stop it jumping around, but certainly the big words that we see coming through here are quality, improvement, rejection, I've mentioned already, integrity, which is great to see. I can also see some frustration, misery, and fear. So we've got lots of positive and negative points coming through. And perhaps I'll go back to this towards the end. If you want to keep voting, you're welcome to do so. But this is quite a nice way to gauge your own perceptions and personal experiences with the peer review process. And I'd be really interested as a thought exercise for you to reflect on your perceptions of peer review after the workshop is finished and see whether anything has changed and what you've learned, or perhaps change your opinion on. So thanks so much for your participation here. I will come back to the word cloud at the end. Okay. So speaking of perceptions of peer review, one of the perceptions that we often hear is that peer review is secretive. It's something that happens behind closed doors, and that only those in the editorial process really know what's happening behind the scenes. And I think, yes, that can be the case, partly due to the anonymity of the process, but our intention today is really to make things more transparent and share how the peer review process works, what it should be, and perhaps some examples of what it shouldn't be, but we do see instances of, and how we can improve things going forward. So as such, I've structured my presentation very much according to the title. What is peer review? What is it not? And then finally, what are we striving for? So in terms of best practice, how can we improve the peer review process? I think this is something we can reflect on further in the Q&A sessions as well. So we've discussed this a little bit already, and it came up in the poll. The role of peer review is really to check the quality as well as the novelty and significance and the presentation of a manuscript that has been submitted for publication. So it's a quality checking process, and that's really important. But at the same time, while checking that quality, the peer reviewer also needs to keep things constructive. In other words, look for ways to improve the work and make recommendations that help to improve the quality. So we're not just pointing out where quality may be lacking or issues need to be addressed, but also how can they be addressed? And that's really important. It needs to do both of these things. The tone of a peer review should be written in a collegial and respectful manner, and that's also in line with this aim of improving the quality of the work and keeping it a positive process and a constructive process. So it's really important that that respect comes across through the peer review process. Peer review should also be thorough and detailed and rigorous. So this is a way of checking what is being published and going out into the public domain. So it's important that that peer review process is rigorous and thorough, comprehensive, goes through the work in a lot of detail so that things aren't missed. It's important that peer review is also independent and unbiased or fair. So we do what we can to try and ensure that the process is fair by avoiding conflict of interest, for example. It's also very often an anonymous process. Now, this depends on the model that is employed by the particular journal. Some journals use an anonymous peer review model, others double anonymous. And then there are other peer review models as well, which are more open and publicly available. But commonly you will find an anonymous or double anonymous process in play. Importantly, peer review needs to remain confidential. So if I'm peer reviewing a manuscript, I shouldn't be sharing the details of that manuscript with my colleagues or talking about my review. It's a confidential process, and this is in line with maintaining respect towards the author and their work so that it's protected until such time as it can ultimately be published. And we see peer review as a service to the academic community. So this is something that we do to support knowledge creation, and we see it as an academic service. So it's something we do for the greater good, if you like. So what is it not? What should peer review not be doing? Well, it's not a gatekeeping exercise. So the role of the peer reviewer is not to make that final decision whether a manuscript should be accepted or rejected, but rather to assess the content and make recommendations to the editor, who will then make the final decision. So it shouldn't be seen as gatekeeping. Rather, the role of peer review, as I said before, is to check quality and novelty and to look for ways to improve the work. So really that's where the emphasis lies. The role of the peer reviewer is not to check for spelling and grammar errors. If the reviewer stumbles across particular errors, they can highlight them for correction, but it's important that the role of the peer reviewer is not confused with that of a proofreader or copy editor. So your role as a scientific expert is to check the content, and really that's where the focus should be, not on editing, spelling, and grammar. Peer review should be supported by detailed explanations and backed up by evidence and examples. So to say that a manuscript is wonderful or terrible, but without providing a proper explanation of why that is the case, is not particularly useful. So peer review should be backed up by evidence and examples and explanations. Peer review is not personal. So I think anybody who's received negative peer reviews can probably relate that it may come across at times almost as if it's a personal attack, but I think it's important to step away from the process and realize that what the peer reviewers are commenting on is not you as a person or your ability as a scientist, but rather on the quality of the work itself, which is ultimately in a draft format and should be improved by the peer review process. So don't take it personally. It's not intended to be personal. It shouldn't be personal. Peer review is also not paid. So it's not a way to make a bit of money on the side. Usually, this is not something that you're going to be paid to do. As I mentioned, it's an academic service, something we do for the scientific community. Okay. It's not a chance to rip apart other people's work and tear it apart. As I said, we need to be collegial, respectful, and constructive. And that is not in line with being hypercritical and really ripping other people's work to pieces. That is not constructive. It's not a chance for the peer reviewer to show how much more they know than the author. Again, to keep things respectful. Yes, you can point out flaws and areas for improvement, but it needs to be done in a respectful manner. Where there are competing interests, so for example, if my lab is competing within the same field as the authors of the manuscript I've been asked to peer review, then I should not be reviewing that work. Okay, that constitutes a conflict of interest, so peer review should not be taking place under those circumstances. So it shouldn't be about my own interests as a reviewer. And on the flip side, it's also not about helping your friends. So if the manuscript that you've been asked to review, the authors you may figure out or be aware that this is one of your friends or close colleagues, somebody you work closely with, then you wouldn't be reviewing that manuscript either. Likewise, that constitutes a conflict of interest. And it's also not an opportunity to boost your own citations or H-index. So the peer reviewer should not be recommending that the author go and cite a bunch of the peer reviewer's papers. That's really not on either. So not good practice. And just to finish off then, what are we striving for? So I think ultimately as editors and as a scientific community as a whole, we are really trying to make the process as fair and transparent as possible. We can talk about that a little bit more in the Q&A session. One way that we can try to make the process more fair is by inviting a diverse range of reviewers. And this can be diversity in terms of where the reviewers are based geographically, their gender, career stage, so inviting a mix of reviewers from early career researchers through to more senior professors. I think it's good to get a mix across the board and a mix of perspectives so that the process is also more representative of the scientific community. And that diversity of opinions is actually one of the things that makes the peer review process quite strong. In terms of transparency, getting rid of this black box perception. I think workshops like this and our monthly journal writing and peer review forum that we run at the SHAS, these types of exercises help to really be more open about what goes on with peer review, how it works, and what is the best practice that we are striving for. I've also listed a few sources here, but I don't want to spend any time on that because I'd like to quickly jump back to our word cloud. I can see some answers are still coming through here, but yes, it maintains very much in line with what we saw before. So the most important answers coming through here: improvement, quality, integrity, evaluation, constructive. I'm so happy to see that. And rejection as well. So thank you so much, everybody, for your participation and for your attention. I'm going to finish off there.
Thank you, Jim. I think the Menti exercise was very enlightening, and it'll be great to come back to it at the end and see if anyone's words may have changed. We're going to move on to a second poll ahead of the next presentation. So I'm going to ask Nadia to, so please, there's a few questions for these ahead of the next two presentations. So please respond. And for those of you joining us from YouTube, the questions are: who I am plays a role in whether my manuscript will be sent for peer review. Is that true or false? Have you ever not revised a paper after a revise or resubmit decision because of a negative review? Peer review is a thankless chore to avoid. True or false? The reviewer decides whether a manuscript is accepted or rejected. True or false? Answers are coming in, and I can see so far everyone seems to be in agreement. So we'll just wait a little bit for people to participate. I think we've got I think the responses are slowing down, so we can close it there. Very interesting results. 79% say false. So it doesn't matter who you are, whether or not your manuscript is sent for peer review. 77% say no, they've not revised a paper because of a negative review. So that's very good to know. Peer review is a thankless chore, and 89% said false. So that's really nice to know. The reviewer decides whether a manuscript is accepted or rejected. This one is a little less in agreement, 60% saying false, 40% saying true. So hopefully we'll get some clarity on that through the remainder of the workshop. So thank you for your answers there. And I now have the pleasure of introducing our next two speakers, and they are both associate editor mentees with the South African Journal of Science. So I'm lucky to be able to work with both of them. The first speaker is Dr. Nkosinathi Madondo. He is a lecturer in academic literacy in the Teaching and Learning Development Center at Mangosuthu University of Technology. He has a PhD from Rhodes University and a Master of Education in English Language and Media Studies from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. He has an ongoing interest in community engagement and development through critical and decolonial theories. Following his presentation will be a presentation by Dr. Shane Redelinghuys. He is the postdoctoral research fellow at the University of the Witwatersrand and the National Institute for Communicable Diseases. where he studies the interplay between the human immune system and infectious diseases. He completed his PhD at the University of Pretoria and enjoys all facets of science, including science communication and exchange of knowledge. He's a thought leader for the Golden Key International Honor Society. And as I said, he's an associate editor mentee for the South African Journal of Science. So we look forward to both of those presentations. Nati, please start us off. Thank you.
You try and share. Sorry.
We can see.
Right. Can you see my screen?
We can see.
Okay, wow, thank you. Sometimes one can be a technological dinosaur, if you know what I mean. So thank you, you can see.
Nati, you're not in
Right.
presenter mode if you want to go into presenter mode, but we can see your slides.
Okay. And to move out.
I think if you just click the little cup at the bottom, is there or
Wait.
slideshow? Slideshow in the middle. Yeah, just to your left a little bit.
Yeah.
Oh, where you are, just go to your right to menu, just below the orange bar. Yeah. Just at the menu at the top next to the home insert draw design animation slideshow.
Slideshow, okay.
No, just above that is some tabs. Yes, just to the right, you'll find slideshow. So you're in design now. If you just go 3 to the right, but yeah, there you go, right on it.
There we go. How is it?
And then
presenter.
yes, present or play from start. Yes, whichever. Perfect.
Right.
No.
Are we good now?
I think I think that's maybe it was play from start.
Okay.
We can see, so you can
I can continue.
You can continue.
Okay. All right, thank you. Sorry about that glitch. Right. So the possibility is that the theme here really is peer review, so there might be some overlaps, between our presentations, and I can see some between the previous speakers and mine, but of course with some differences here and there. So my topic then really is about what reviewers need to know about peer review. And in that sense, my talk will revolve around taking the scholarship forward. So in other words, my thinking is that for peer review, the idea really is to take the scholarship forward, but how do we do that? So of course, the previous poll indicated at most the quality, of the manuscript, which is also one of my focus, in this presentation. Now, to take the scholarship forward, as a reviewer, what is important is that a cursory report that you give to the writer or to the manuscript cannot really do justice to the quality, of the review, that is espoused, but a detailed report, has a potential to give constructive feedback, so that the manuscript can be improved, so that it is in a position to be published. So what is important is that as a reviewer yourself, you are in fact in the process, I would say, of being reviewed, so that will be based on the quality of the report that you give. So it was interesting for me to learn this from my mentor, Professor Chrissy Bowie, in one of our discussion and in one of the lectures she gave at Rhodes University recently in March of this year. She said that she was invited to sit as a specialist panel in the NRF rating, and so. But what was interesting was that the NRF experts expected her to rate the review, of the academic output. So, as a reviewer, the idea is not just to provide the feedback, but the kind of feedback that you provide is also important because it says something about you as a reviewer, and of course about the quality of the constructive feedback, that you give. I think that point is very important to know as reviewers. So what is the quality of a manuscript? It can be judged on the basis of a clear argument that is presented, so as a reader, I don't need to guess what it is that the author is trying to say here. Of course, if the argument is not clear, Professor Finch has alluded to the fact that my response or my comment should be collegial because the idea is to improve, so the manuscript quality will be judged on the basis of a clear argument, on the basis of the topic that has the potential to inform current debate. So in my field, for example, social sciences and education, so current debates would be issues related to, for example, how globalization, has affected how universities are managed, for example, from a business management point of view, and how that then affects how we teach, what we teach, and so on and so forth. So the topic, that you choose to write about, how relevant it is to the current debate, so those are the issues that are also important. And of course, the methodological coherence, of a paper as a reviewer, it is important for me, to understand these issues and to know these issues. For example, writing from an educational research point of view. If, for example, one is doing a review, of some work, but the approach, of course, is systematic review, and writing from that position, and one does not maybe acknowledge the limitations of a systematic review in educational research, would be some kind of methodological incoherence, because that systematic review emerges largely, from positivism tradition, and it emerges from health, sciences, medicine, to try to find evidence, from protocols, procedures, that are used. And of course, it doesn't mean that in education we cannot use systematic review, but acknowledging its limitation and how you intend to deal with it, is very important. Otherwise, it would warrant some methodological incoherences. And of course, conceptual depth, how, for example, the concept that you use inform the idea or the argument that you are presenting, so how theoretical depth tell us something, so rather than using theory to describe what has already, the debates that have already been won, how the theory, for example, help us understand, say, for example, how the university space, shape what we do and what we cannot do based on the historical, political, and the social nature of the university. So theoretically, how deep, this study is structured around it. And of course, this will depend on different, studies, different fields, that we are part of. Some fields might not really require that depth, in theory, but others, will do. And of course, it means if you are a reviewer, it will be difficult to review a paper that is not within your speciality. To be able to judge this aspect that I've just mentioned, it means you need to review a paper that is within your expertise as a reviewer. And of course, what is not quality, on what quality is not? Unsubstantiated claims, or sweeping statements. In other words, you make claims about something, but you cannot substantiate them, And of course, these are the issues that I need to point out when I'm reviewing a paper or a manuscript. But of course, I need to indicate these in such a way that they indicate the potential for improvement, not to rip, the person apart, as the previous speaker, have alluded to. Now, some authors, of course, try to make an easy publication to earn subsidy, So I will come to this point, towards the end, because it closely linked to the idea of neoliberal ideology, in terms of what happens in universities today. But we need to be aware, of such things as reviewers. And of course, this is the point I've just alluded to, that one need to, the paper that you evaluate should be within your area of expertise to avoid cursory reporting. So for me, and I guess you would agree with me, that to review is to take the scholarship forward, scholarship in terms of research, in various aspects, of scholarship. So it is not just about me wanting to get glory or wanting to get more subsidy as a writer, but it is about me as a reviewer taking the scholarship forward. Now, concluding thoughts, the big challenge about research and writing and publication now is the challenge of neoliberal agenda, in the sense that what happens now, what emerges from universities, from the work that we do, is largely conditioned by what happens globally, in terms of globalization, where most of what we do is largely, situated in market principles or business-like principles. So there is more of the commodification, of knowledge, in the sense that we want to make profits, in the form of subsidies that we get. And in the process, what then that does is to reduce the quality of the work that we need to do. Because what is important is an acknowledgement and the knowledge of what we mean by knowledge production and what are the processes involved to produce knowledge, so that we produce the quality of the knowledge that we need to. Otherwise, neoliberal agenda in a way compromises these aspects. And of course, chances are, as reviewers, we will receive, papers, of this nature. And of course, we don't have to rip these apart, but we need to provide constructive feedback for potential publication in order to take the scholarship forward. If you want to have access to the work that Professor Bowie presented. As far as some aspects of reviewing, you can access them, on the YouTube attached. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your participation and listening. Stop sharing. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Nati. Shane, we are ready when you are.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Just getting the presentation.
Those of you who are raising your hand, we will take questions in the Q&A session after. If possible, please put them in the Q&A box. Thanks, Shane.
Good morning, everybody. So the title of my presentation today is What Authors Should Know About Peer Review. So when I was given this topic, and having recently joined the editorial team of the SAJS as an associate editor mentee, I thought it might be good to shed a little bit of light on the process behind the scenes after you submit your article to a journal. I'll also, throughout the presentation, touch on some random topics that feed into the peer review process. So whenever authors submit the article to a journal, there is an initial assessment by the editorial office where the paper is screened for the correct formatting, correct referencing style, its word limit, etc. And this process usually takes on average between 2 to 16 weeks. The journal manager might send your paper or your manuscript back to you to inform you that you have not adhered to the author instructions or the guidelines, and this might lead to some delay in your paper being processed. Your article is then assessed by either or both the editor-in-chief and an associate editor, where if they deem your manuscript not suitable for publication in the journal, they might reject it, which we call desk rejection. Or your paper might otherwise go for review. The paper is then sent to reviewers. And when you log on to the online portal of the journal, you will see that the status that's displayed is under review. And the journal then awaits the acceptance or the declining of the review by the reviewers. But when reviews are received by the editor, they are assessed. The editor makes a decision. Your paper might be rejected after the editor review has reviewed the reviewer reports, or the editor might request you to do some revisions. When you have implemented the revisions, you resubmit your article, and your article is then again assessed by the editor. The editor might decide whether this is sufficient and might accept it as is, but generally it goes for a second round of reviewers where the revised manuscript is sent to the reviewers and the whole process is repeated. When the reviews have been sufficiently addressed by the authors, the manuscript might be accepted for publication and will then be sent for production and ultimately publication. And this whole process on average takes around 100 days. It's very important for authors also to know their publishers' policies. It's crucial to follow the instructions for authors to ensure that you do have the correct formatting and you stick to the word limit. If you pay attention to this detail, it will definitely improve the aesthetics, the overall aesthetics of your manuscript, which will simplify reading, and it will just help the reviewer appreciate the content and the science for what it is. These policies are to help streamline the review process and also to minimize the turnaround time of your paper, because a lot happens behind the scenes, as you've seen just now. It's also worth your while to look at the publishing agreements of the journal that you are submitting to. For example, as the journal, do they publish open access? What are their publication fees? Because this might be a factor to consider when you submit to a specific journal. Another factor to consider is also the ethical principles of the journal to ensure that it is a reputable journal that you are submitting to. And you also want to ensure that you are submitting the correct ethics documents to ultimately improve your chances, or just to ensure that the review process will commence and there are no hurdles along the way. I think another topic or question that authors generally have or wonder about is whether it is advised to follow up on their submission. So is it acceptable? Yes, definitely so. You are allowed to do that. It is your paper after all. It definitely won't affect the handling of your paper or the review process. You have to be mindful to do so respectfully, and also ensure that you have consulted the online tracking system of the journal to track the status of your paper. If your paper is desk rejected and deemed not suitable for the journal, you'll hear back very soon from the journal. So you won't have to wait a very long time for that. But when you log onto the online tracking system and you see that your paper is under review, it could mean one of several things. Firstly, the reviewers might have been invited and the editor is awaiting the reviewer responses. They might decide to accept to review or decline to review. The editor might also be waiting for the reviewers to submit their reviewer reports if they have accepted to review your paper. Or the reviews might have been received back by the editorial office and they are currently being assessed by the associate editor. So when would be a good time to do so? It is heavily dependent on your study field. For example, if you utilized advanced methodologies or complex statistical analyses in your paper, naturally this might prolong the review process. A safe time frame to do so might be after around 3 to 6 months. And this is just based on an analysis of around 3 million papers that were indexed in PubMed from 1981 to 2015, which indicated that the median time from submission until acceptance has remained consistent at around 100 days, believe it or not. If you want to select a journal to submit your manuscript to, you might consider something like science journal rankings, or your science journal rankings, or your impact factor of the journal. But if you want an additional layer of maybe what we could call transparency, I suppose, you could consult a website called SciRev. This is a platform in which researchers actually review the review process. The tool can be used to view researcher-provided statistics, including time until first review received, total handling time, time until desk rejection, the number of review reports received, the quality of the reviews, which might be a little bit subjective depending on whether the authors received a rejection or an acceptance letter, and also the number of review rounds of review. So this is what SciRev looks like. At the top, you can see all those different statistics that the authors provide. They could also provide a motivation to note their review experience and just give a bit of background sketching on what the review was like and the reviewer reports. So when I searched for the South African Journal of Science, I only found one entry, which was a very long time ago, around 2012. And overall, it seemed that this review actually received a good review on SciRev. So just to conclude my talk, when you receive the Dear Johnny letter, what should you do? First thing, as Gemma and Kosinati emphasized, don't take it personal. A manuscript rejection does not mean it is the end of the road for your paper. You might want to take a step back and consider why your paper was rejected. You can take the reviewer, well, you should take the reviewer, reviewer reports into account. And it might not necessarily be that your work was not good enough. It could be something as simple as your paper was either too specialized or maybe too general for the audience of that specific journal. After having done that, you may want to decide if the work is worth resubmitting. Most of the time it is. I've heard of stories of people receiving numerous rejections, 5+, and they've still managed to publish their papers. So yeah, just hang in there. I think it's worth it. I mean, if the work's been done, it should be out there. You could then, if you decide on resubmitting your paper to another journal, improve the work by just taking a different approach with your analysis. You could brainstorm with your peers and maybe just write your paper from a different angle. But brainstorming with peers, getting input from non-subject matter experts, I think might be worth your while to just improve your paper and improve the overall understanding of your paper and just to convey that message of the work you've done. Yeah, and that's it from me.
Thank you, Shannon, and thank you, Nati, for those insightful presentations. And I hope that certainly those misconceptions, if there were any in our participants, have been busted. We have a Q&A time now, and we have a few questions coming in. Please do put any questions in the Q&A box. I see there are a few questions that most likely will be answered in later sessions. So please hang on to those questions. We will get to them after the Q&A. The first question from Christian, maybe Gemma, this one is more for you. What to do when the grammar and the spelling are bad, but the content is worth publishing? As an editor or reviewer, I guess, what would you do?
It's quite a tricky one, really. I mean, ultimately, when you're publishing, it's also about communication, and the content might be good, but you need to be able to communicate that effectively. So I think if the standard of the writing is so poor that message is not coming across, then it would be very difficult for a reviewer to assess that fairly, and perhaps those issues need to be dealt with first. I still don't think it's the reviewer's role to correct that language, but I think if the presentation is in such a form that it's reading like an early draft, I think a manuscript like that would likely be desk rejected, to give the authors an opportunity to correct that before it would go on to peer review. So I don't know if Leslie wants to add anything to that, but I think it's very difficult to assess the content of the manuscript when that presentation and language is of that kind of standard.
Thanks, Gemma. Leslie,
thank you, Gemma, for suggesting that I give a response. I'm sort of jumping up and down here wanting to say something. I completely agree with Gemma. We do, I mean, this is an issue which concerns lots of journals, particularly in our context in Africa, but it's a global issue. So most of the people who are wanting to publish in English language journals throughout the world are not first language English. So that's important to bear in mind, that writing in clear, simple, understandable English is important both for writers and for the people who are going to be reading, because most of the people who read journals in English are also not first language English. We do desk reject, as Gemma says, if something looks like a first draft. There are a number of journals, including our own, which might go a little bit further if we can see, we don't have to, it's not required, but if we can see that the argument is really good, so not exactly what Gemma was talking about, if we see that the argument is basically good, but there are problems, we may offer some support. Journals are not required to do that, but there are a number of journals, particularly based in the Global South, which do try and provide that kind of support for authors. But generally speaking, if you're trying to get into journals, make sure that the language is right. So get that clear. You don't want to be rejected on the basis of language. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you, Lynn.
Thanks, Gemma and Leslie. I think this one is from an author perspective. So maybe Shane, if you could answer. Can you differ with reviewer comments if it's distorting the angle of your paper and inform the editor accordingly?
Hi, sorry, I'm just reading that question again. Can you differ with the reviewer comment? Yeah, sure. I mean, I think you can differ. Again, you've got to do so respectfully, and you can make your case to the editor, the handling editor, and then yeah, I think that's the best you can do. You can differ and make your case to the editor, and yeah, just I suppose just be as professional as possible, and more often than not, I think the editor will be reasonable and see your point and understand your point. Ultimately, it is still, it's still up to the editor as to whether they can accept your argument or not. And again, if it's not in your favor, if the decision is not in your favor, you have to respectfully accept that.
Thanks, Jane. I think we have time for one more question. This one, maybe Nati, you can answer from a reviewer perspective. Does the reviewer have the obligation to check the statistical data?
Yes. Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Well, as I said earlier, that what is important also is the area of expertise, of the reviewer. And so I might get a paper and to find that I might need, some expert, if I'm not really an expert in statistics, I might need some input, from a colleague within the reviewers, to see the relevance and the coherence, of the statistics that is used, in the manuscript. Alternatively, yes, because my job as the reviewer is to judge the quality and the relevance of the argument presented, in the paper. So what does the statistics use tell me, about what are they explaining? Is it just description of what is there, or are they trying to tell me something, the why of what is there? So as a reviewer, these are the issues that I need to be aware of. These are the issues that I need to deal with. So I think, yes, as a reviewer, I have that obligation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nati. Please keep post in your questions in the Q&A. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the workshop as well. So if we haven't got your question yet, don't despair. We will try to answer all the questions. Ahead of our next presentation, we have another quick poll just to get your opinions on what's going to come next. So while those responses are coming in, just for those of you on YouTube, the questions are, have you ever used an AI-based tool like ChatGPT to write a paper? And do you believe the use of technologies such as AI should be allowed in peer review? And quite differing opinions on that. So I think our responses are slowing down, so we can stop there. Thank you for everyone who's put their answers into the poll. It seems that there is a majority who have not used AI for writing their papers, and quite a spread in terms of how technology such as AI should be used in peer, or if it should be used in peer review, with 41% saying yes, that it can play a supportive role, and 25% saying it cannot replace peer reviewers. So thank you for those responses, and it promises to be an interesting discussion. And thank you. We can close that poll. And on that note, I'm very pleased to welcome a special guest speaker, Dr. Martin Becker. Martin is a computational social scientist and AI ethics researcher, and he lectures on ethics and the social sciences in the School of Electronic and Information Engineering at the University of the Witwatersrand. Martin has degrees in value studies and philosophy from Stellenbosch, peace studies from Bradford, development from the London School of Economics, and a PhD from the University of Johannesburg. Before joining academia, he was head of strategy and later of research at the Royal Bafokeng Administration, and served on the World Economic Forum's advisory panel for sustainable mining and minerals. So Martin, a big welcome to you, and I can see you bring a wealth of knowledge on various topics. So we're very excited to see what you're going to teach us about AI and peer review.
Thanks, Linda. Thanks for having me. Can you hear me all right? Is the sound quality okay?
We can hear you well.
Fantastic. Do you want me to share my screen, or are you uploading the presentation?
If you can share, but if you would like us to share, we can.
No, that's fine. Let me do it from my end. If you could just confirm that you'll see it, because in a second, of course, I'll not be able to see anything else. So let me just quickly do that. And we'll go to this and there. And let's go.
Perfect.
All good and wonderful.
Yes.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. It's wonderful of you to, what's wonderful for me to be here. It's very kind of you to invite me. And what we're going to do in the next 25 minutes is it's like a whistle-stop tour. Firstly, to talk about large language models and sort of how they work a little bit. Let's just mute this phone. And then what does it mean for us as peer reviewers? I did say large language model tools and you, the cunning peer reviewer. I had all sorts of other adjectives, and in the end, I said, okay, let's just go with boring for now. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. How do they work? Because how they work have a bearing on how we think about them. Plus, there's all sorts of nonsense out there. This really has been the year of large language models, hasn't it? What are they good at and what are they bad at as a function of how they operate, how to get the best out of them. So just a little bit about that. That's sort of a side quest. And then on to the meat. So what do I do as a reviewer if something smells fishy? What level of AI support or large language model support is acceptable? How should it be referenced, if at all? And then how should prompts be shared? Right. And the sort of trigger warning bit is to say that I do actually show some examples here that are, have racist undertones and awful things are in there, because this is what large language models produce, or we should know that. This is obviously not done in a gratuitous way, in any which way. Okay, so, right. If I wanted to write a large language model, now, if you have been doing computational linguistics, or if you're in the ML space, this will be frustratingly simple, but I think this is an important way to explain it. If I want to write a large language model, I would do it this way. I write a little bit of computer code of something that reads text, all the texts that are in the internet, for argument's sake. Every book that's ever been written, that's published via Project Gutenberg, or it's scanned via Google Books, every single text. And as I do that, just billions of words, I start figuring out concepts, not necessarily words, not necessarily lemmas, but just concepts, ideas. And I start arranging them in patterns of similarity of sorts. And if I do this many times over and over again, I sort of create what can be thought of as a universe in space, sort of vector space, if you like, of little stars. And each star represents a concept. So cat is a concept, is an idea, and mug is a concept. Now, the language models that we're dealing with have about 20,000 of these concepts, whereas love is one, and cat is one, and coffee mug is another. And around each star, we've got these 20,000 stars, I have little planets, and the planets would be the synonyms for that idea. So I might have cat, but I also have Kati, and I have El Gato, and I have Gat, and maybe feline or something that surrounds this little star system. So when I'm reading a great speech, for instance, I Have a Dream by Martin Luther King Jr., all that this model is seeing is a journey by a little spaceship, if you like, from star to star to star to star. That was one sentence. From idea to idea to idea to idea, sort of a journey. I'm traversing vector space, if you like. And that's what it does. So when I go to a large language model and I say, complete the sentence for me, the cat sat on the, then out of the 20,000 possibilities of ideas, it's going to say, well, only about 2,000 of those are plausible, mathematically speaking. Okay, so 18,000 are not even an option. And of the 2,000 that are possible, that have a predictive quality in them, Matt is going to be the most probable. So I'm just going to say the cat sat on the, complete this for me, Matt. There we go. So it's a mathematical model of, if I do this journey, what have I seen over all the text that I've read? Matt is the most probable. Okay, so there's no thinking, there's no real understanding in the human sense. There is another sense of understanding, and I'm not going to go into those debates right now. It's a probabilistic, a stochastic model that does that. Okay, so there are many large let's do this. Okay, there are many large language models today. If you didn't see a picture of a sort of a galaxy there, then someone should speak up. But I assume that you can see that, so that's all cool. Okay, so there are many large language models today. You need a corpus of text, in other words, a really large body of text. You have this mathematical model that just knows lots and lots of paths, and it has memorized the paths. It's called the base model. So it sort of tries to answer, predict the next word in a very sophisticated way. That's the base model. And then on top of that, it has what might be called safety layers. So if I say, to a large language model, typically, if I say, how do I make a bomb? A Molotov cocktail. It tries to interpret what might be the right response. Right response to that kind of a question is, here is how to create a Molotov cocktail. And it just predicts the next word and it does the whole thing. But then that's what the base model sort of dishes up. Before it serves that to us, there's a safety layer kind of reading that and semantically passing that and going, ooh, this is flagging some danger words or some concepts that we shouldn't let out. So it's almost as if there's another model that catches what the base model creates and flags it and stops it and said, don't give that to the reader. Give them, sorry, as a large language model, I'm not allowed to give you content that could harm people or something like that. Okay, so those are safety layers, and we can think of them almost as separate little galaxies. And how do we figure out what people like and what they want and what kind of the responses are? Well, we have this mathematical model, but then we also show that to humans and we ask them, here are two possible responses. Which do you find most helpful to this question? And you have people sort of picking, I want A or I want B, hundreds of thousands of times over. Okay, so we don't only have one little galaxy, we actually have clusters of them together. The one might be the base model and others might be these kind of safety layers, and we patch them all the time. Okay, so based on that, what would large language models be good at? Well, certainly the first thing is it's really good at repackaging of ideas, right? So if I give it a list of ideas and I say, can you rephrase this for me? Well, it just finds out what the most elegant journey through vector space in the little spaceship is. Like, how is the nicest way to package this? If I ask it to summate or summarize text, it does that very well because it says, how is the shortest way to dish out this journey through these, let's say for argument's sake, 70 concepts that my author has visited. So it just gives it to you. It's superfluous in fixing grammar because if it says, I were there, it says, well, mathematically that word doesn't make sense. So it's probably I was there. So it's not, it doesn't understand grammar in any way. It's just, it says that there's a more probable way to formulate this little route, and it fixes grammar. Style transfer is wonderful. So if I say, here's I Have a Dream by Martin Luther King Jr., but I want that same speech in the style of Trevor Noah, well, a large language model, that's what it's made to do, right? Because it says, I'm going to traverse that same journey. I'm going to dish up the same concepts, but instead of the little planets next to each star, that was the original text, I'll try and phrase it in a way that sounds like I have read the writings of Trevor Noah. And exactly in the same way that it does that, it does translation, and it does translation extremely well. So if I say, translate that into isiZulu, it doesn't know what it's doing. It just moves through the same concepts, i.e. from star to star to star, but it looks for the little planet around that star that was the isiZulu one. Okay, so it does that well. And of course, we've all played around with it, and we've seen examples on social media and wherever, where you can do a bit of brainstorming and sort of predictable brainstorming. So dinner ideas, you know, it's not going to tell you to go and eat grass. And, you know, so it's not super creative in that sense. I mean, if you want to talk to me about Sparks, down at the back. But anyway, the idea is that it dishes up in strange combinations, in generative combinations, things that it's seen before. Okay. I'm not going to entertain you with the examples just because of time, but here was a silly example of me taking Staying Alive, the contract by the Bee Gees, the song by the Bee Gees into a contract to wonderful effect. And lots of ways of playing here with style transfer, right? So can you explain the term stochastic parrots to me? It's kind of hidden behind my console here, but that was what it was. And then I can say, can you explain this to me in the language of a 7-year-old? Okay, and it does it really well because that's style transfer. And then I can say, okay, can you translate that into Afrikaans? Because my English isn't great. Or can you translate that into isiZulu? So that's a wonderful thing that it is able to do because it actually knows what a stochastic parrot is. Stochastic parrot is a form of criticism of large language models. Some more silly examples is write a biblical verse in the style of the King James Bible explaining how to remove a peanut butter sandwich from a VCR. And it came to pass that a man was troubled by a peanut butter sandwich. And so it goes on. Style transfer, right? All it's doing is playing around with style. It does it in a way it's seen before because it was also trained on the King James Bible. And you could take any other sort of recognizable style. You could say, do this in the style of, I don't know, Kevin Hart or something. Okay, right. Now, just one thing, I assume that lots of us as reviewers are also lecturers and teachers. So just a little side thing before I move on to the weaknesses, which and the weaknesses is where we'll spend more time, I think, is one of the joys of large language models is turning around the direction of interlocution. In other words, asking it to ask me questions. So for instance, hey, I'm learning about the stochastic parrot critique of large language models. I'm learning about meiosis and mitosis, whatever. Pretend that you are my teacher. Can you ask me questions until you feel that I have satisfied a basic understanding? You could even say, give it to me in multiple choice questions where there are 5 options. Give me a minimum of 10 questions until you give me a grade or something like that. So if you turn that round, if you say, I don't know, you know, we've got 7,000 high schools in South Africa and only 700 of them are good. You know, career counseling. Pretend that you're a career counselor. I am a grade 12 student or grade 11 student. I have no idea what to study. Can you ask me questions? And after these questions, make a recommendation. And it will say, hello, young person, and it will play that game. So it's a style transfer. It plays the role of what it thinks, and it provides that. Now, of course, it can do all sorts of harm in the process, which we'll get to. But generally, if it's within the sort of guardrails of normal conversation, then the answers will be predictable. Do you like solving this kind of a problem? Do you like this kind of a working environment, etc., etc.? So it's certainly no replacement for a guidance or a therapist. Or a psychologist, definitely not, nor should we ever think of that. But changing the direction of interlocution is always good. Or you could ask it, I asked it the other day, can you guess my middle name? And I'm only allowed to say yes or no, and it got it within 7 guesses. That was pretty good. Okay. So it knows how to play games. Okay, let's talk about the weaknesses. If we've said it is a universe, it's just a series of stars, and it knows paths across this, then we understand that this is a mathematical model. It's not a linguistic model. It's not a model of how the world, it has no experience of how the world works or how it really is. And hence we say that it's stochastic, in other words, probabilistic. It's a stochastic parrot. It repeats what it finds out there. It's not connected in any which way to the truth, right? That's the base model. We can build models on top of that, as people at OpenAI, the people behind ChatGPT, are doing all the time, is find extra models to build on top of that so that we can catch some of those logic errors and that. But the by design, it doesn't do that. And then, of course, we have this phenomenon of hallucinations that, you know, was like a niche term at this time last year, and now everybody uses it. And that's the fact that it says things that isn't true, but it says it with the same authority of the things that are true, right? Again, because that's what it's programmed to do. It just follows a path. So if I say, let's think of something maybe a little bit more nefarious. Why was Nelson Mandela the worst president ever? It will just try to answer my question. There's no thinking, there's no reason behind it. It will have what it has in its corpus and try to say, well, the reason, and it will try to do that. And maybe that the base model dishes that up, and a safety layer says, okay, wait, hold on, that's it, you know, careful there. But the base model will try to give you what you want. And of course, when we are asking that to do research or anything like that, these hallucinations are baked in. Okay, so it's just a mathematically probable thing that it does. Okay. Causal reasoning is not built in. I hope you understand that now based on the framework. Let me just look at the time. Oh, goodness, we are running out of time. Okay, and jailbreaking, and I think I'm going to just skip over that. That's the idea of there are lots of ways in which to make it say bad things, in which to sort of get around the safety layers. Maybe if there's time later, I can show you the examples. I think I'm just going to skip over them now. I'm not going to talk about Jan LeCun. I'm not going to show you the examples of where logic breaks down or where reasoning breaks down, and applications of that. I'm just scrolling through this. This is the example of how to make it say awful racist things. I can discuss that happily, of ways in which it goes wrong, because it has no moral compass. Okay. We should also finally, before we get to what does it mean for me as a peer reviewer, I suppose, talk about that there are other harms as well. We should know that there's human labor exploitation. So the people doing that A/B testing, you know, the dishing up of, here's the question, here are two answers, which one do you prefer? Those are people in data centers, and it's outsourced because they live in, they get paid a pittance and they work in awful conditions and they have to see awful stuff. We're talking, you know, text talking about child molestation and just awful things. Okay, so they are responsible for creating the safety layers, but they actually have to go through the awful exposure. So we should know that that's there. There's an enormous environmental cost, both computationally, but specifically in the training of these models. And for good reason, people like OpenAI are not talking about this, but we're talking of, you know, the size of a city, electricity usage for training of these models. There are lots of concerns about the monopolizing of power, because we've basically, you know, 3 large language models which everybody's starting to rely on. And of course, because of the size of these models and these paths, these connections between the stars, you know, 17 trillion in the previous model of ChatGPT, makes it fundamentally ununderstandable. You know, we can't say explain your reasoning or anything like that. It's just too much. I'm not going to talk about the commodity fetishism. I'm not going to talk about the threats right now, except of course maybe this last one. For us as educators, there's always this threat of mass scale cheating. Okay, some examples of the awful stuff that comes out. All people's resistance to this. Okay, Maybe I'm going to skip how to get the most out of large language models just before Linda says, Martin, you have gone way over your time. Okay, maybe I'll stop here for a quick second and just to say, as a peer reviewer, there is no way that you have to check for AI generated text. So there are tools that say that they do this. It takes less than a month for the model to be ahead of them again. So I know it was in on, for instance, Turnitin for a while last year. They couldn't prove it. You know, it was a probability of AI usage. There's no way that you can prove that it was used. So it is an issue. Okay, so lots of groundwork. Hopefully some of that fun, but hopefully all of it useful, or maybe the other way around. Okay, what do I do if something smells fishy? For whatever journal one is authoring, we want to understand where the publication stands vis-a-vis large language models. So it could be that we say, you are not allowed to use that. And then that should be in the terms of the journal. It should be written and it should be on there before you submit, or, you know, information to authors. That has to be clear that we are not winging it. It's not Wild West stuff. So every single journal needs to know where it stands on this. We could explore this a little bit later when we chat. Okay. So the next thing I would do is if I feel that some of this is inauthentic, and that is because you read it and this is your subject matter and you feel as if something is awry here, the language doesn't work exactly, the argumentation doesn't flow in the way it would. Here are maybe some funny bits that aren't quoted that should be quoted, or I see the right names, the familiar names, but they're appearing in strange places. So firstly, I'm going to quickly see, did this author acknowledge the usage of large language models? Did they do it in the bibliography? Did they do it in the acknowledgements? Is there a note somewhere? So do they do that? It may be that they have cited it. It may be that they have written it out. And if not, I would reach back to the author. And it depends, of course, on, you know, the electronic interface that is used. But I would try and go back to the author and say, listen, we have this policy. Have you recognized that? So there is a onus on you as the reader, as the reviewer, as far as I'm concerned, to flag this and return and say, listen, this is where we stand on this. Are you sure that we are in the right ethical space? How should it be referenced? Well, firstly, we should be sure if it's permitted at all. If it is permitted, then, for instance, APA have guides. So they say, this is how you reference ChatGPT, and it goes into the bibliography. There are other guides to say that you have it in the acknowledgements, and it has to be the first acknowledgement. And not only that, there was some support, but the level of support. And I will talk about the level of support in a second. And then finally, the sharing of the prompts. So my recommendation, obviously, I'm not a member, I'm not on the board of any of the journals that are represented today, but my recommendation in the strongest terms is that if it is permitted to be used at all, then people should be sharing their prompts, in other words, what they serve to the large language model and what is served back should be shared. Now, that can't be shared in the paper, of course, so there should be a link to a repository of sorts, and the industry standard is normally to do that on GitHub. Okay. An unresolved question is, how do we, how a journal checks for paraphrased plagiarism? So in other words, it quotes, it has something that is pretty much Amartya Sen there, but it doesn't, but it is paraphrased. So it is not a direct quote, but it doesn't acknowledge that this comes from Amartya Sen. So this is a hard thing, and nobody's solved that yet. Okay, let me go on. I've clicked around, so let me just move this. Okay, so how are the prompts shared? Let me just repeat that. I think there should be a link somewhere. It could be a footnote, it could be acknowledgement, it could be something in the references to an online repository, whether that's a Google Drive where they've uploaded, like saved the actual screenshots, whether that's on GitHub, or whether many journals allow for supplementary documentation and a PDF saved of that record. I think all of those would be acceptable as long as it's in a format that cannot be fiddled with post hoc. So here is what I did. Here was my interaction. I mean, if one publishes in Nature, right, you have to share all your data. You have to share all the tests, all the SPSS code, or your R script, or all of that. I think that sort of reproducibility standard is good in any case, right? And it's always good to reference the version, the date on which that is done, because these versions are updated sometimes more than once a day of large language models. So I said the levels of use. So firstly, that is how a journal thinks about levels of use, but also how the author should be reporting levels of use. Well, it could be a use ban, as in not used at all. It can be used as spelling and grammar assistance, or a proofing tool. And quite frankly, I'm sorry, I'm going over time now. So I'll try and wrap it up very quickly. This is where I think it's a great tool. And I think this is a leveling tool. And in the previous speaker spoke about second language speakers, second language readers, right? So, and I'm finding that also with students when I'm lecturing, is all of a sudden a first language isiZulu speaker who they had the ideas in their head, but they couldn't express it in an eloquent way, can now write the essay with good ideas. Once the thinking is done, I then take it to the large language model and say, fix my language, fix my grammar. It doesn't do the thinking on my behalf. It just puts it into nice academic language with the correct register. That's a wonderful tool. And of course, if you have money and you're an author, you ask somebody and pay somebody to do that anyway before you submit to a top tier journal. Anyway, so I think this is in line with the general ethos and ethical frameworks. But there's a higher level where there's a co-creation and editor back and forth. What about this? What about that? Restructure that ideas. Of course, large language models can do that, but that's different to simple proofing. So that's, as far as I'm concerned, level 3. Level 4 is if you bring that in, right, at the planning level. So I am writing a paper about this. Can you help me with X or Y? Certainly, if one is using some of these academic tools, like say Elicit or something that says, help me find literature in this field. So that's at the brainstorming and planning level. And of course, if it's over to you, no holds barred, that's sort of the 5th level, open the gates. And if I may, I would advocate against that strongly. Of course, the 2 principles, as discussed before, still count. So we have to show our prompts. We have to expect writers or candidate writers who submit to share their prompts. And the person, the author, remains responsible for their work. So at no stage can someone say, oh, well, it's what the large language model gave me, right? Okay, if your name goes on it, it's your work. You cannot put the name as a co-author of a large language model. People have tried, and of course, okay. And I think that's it for now. So I apologize for going slightly over time there, and apologies for the rush, but I hope that that's helped a little bit. I'm going to stop the share now.
Thank you, Martin. I think we were all so absorbed. We were quite keen to, sorry, you had to skip a few there, but hopefully they'll, we will share your slides if you permit us. So we will be able to see what you didn't get to say, but that was truly fascinating, and I learned so much. So thank you for that. I'm going to introduce you to the next speaker, Leslie. Leslie Swass is Professor of Psychology at Stellenbosch University. His research focuses on disability rights and mental health issues in Southern Africa. And he has a particular interest in developing academic writing skills and increasing access to academic publishing. And he is the editor-in-chief of the Scandinavian Journal of Disability, and I'm very happy to say the editor-in-chief of the South African Journal of Science. So Leslie, over to you, and we look forward to, oh, and I in fact have forgot to share the last poll. So I wonder if we can do that super quick, sorry. We'll give it just 30 seconds. You can see, Leslie, you're already ready to go. So for those of you who are fast.
No, this is useful for my presentation, so it's fine.
And I can see the questions coming in, and we've got a Q&A session after this. So we are looking forward to further discussions on all of the presentations so far. I know there are burning questions waiting to be answered. So I think we can stop it there. Thanks, Nadia. And it looks like peer review mentoring is not something most of our participants have been involved in, but not even writing groups so much. So hopefully that something Leslie says in his presentation will ignite some thinking along those lines. So thank you, Leslie.
Okay, well, thank you. And that's a real hard act to follow. So thank you very much, Martin. And I'm going to go quite quickly. I mean, all of us could have just, carried on listening to Martin. I'm going to try and cut mine a little bit shorter so we have time for discussion. But that was a wonderful presentation, and as I say, hard one to follow. Okay, so I'm just trying to. Yeah. So where are we? I mean, what I'm going to be talking about is just really aimed at people who wanted to get into peer reviewing, and there've been a number of questions in the chat about this. So peer review remains, it's difficult, problematic, but it's absolutely central. And it's as important if you want to be an academic or a researcher as writing your own articles. All journals are experiencing something of a crisis in peer reviewing. We struggle to find peer reviewers, but without peer reviews, journals can't function. So who are the peers? All of us. A peer is just somebody like you. So what is a peer? A peer is somebody like you. And every single person on this call and every single person who's interested in academic work has a responsibility to keep the system going. And what I do as an author myself, every time I send an article for peer review, I make sure that I do a peer review of somebody else's work, so that there is a kind of fair system. And as an author, what do I want? And it's very similar to what, as an editor, I want from a peer reviewer. I want a person who's competent, constructive, fair, kind. These have been mentioned before. Clear. Somebody who's focused on making my work better. And again, we've seen this a bit in the chat, and Gemma also mentioned this at the beginning. I do not want somebody who's trying to make me a version of themselves. So a peer reviewer is not somebody who tries to get me to write the article that they wish that they had written. Okay. One of the big issues that people just getting into peer reviewing often experience is the worry about not being good enough. And I often say that all academics feel that they're imposters. In my experience, the only people who don't worry at times that they're not good enough and don't know what's going on are people who actually are not good enough and don't know what's going on. We all have these doubts. Some people think peer reviewers are only professors. That's absolutely not the case. As soon as you start publishing, you should also be peer reviewing. And really what's important as a peer reviewer is you have to be clear about what you know and and what you don't know. And it is as an editor, I am delighted when a peer reviewer says, I can read this article or this submission from this point of view. What I don't know is that. So the example was used earlier that, for example, around statistical knowledge. It is very helpful to me when somebody says, look, I've looked at this. I don't know the statistical technique. If this technique has been correctly implied, then I think this article is fine in this way and has these and these problems. But I really recommend as a peer reviewer that you get somebody who understands this technique, because I don't. And what editors generally do, what I try to do as an editor, is to get a range of reviewers with a range of competencies, particularly in an interdisciplinary journal like the South African Journal of Science. But don't try and pretend as a peer reviewer that you know things that you don't know, because that's not helpful to anybody. I often get things that I'm not sure I'm the right person to review. And what I suggest you do when you get something for review, read the paper quickly, and then make a list of what you think you can do and what you can't do. And how important is to make an assessment for yourself? How important is what you can do to helping the author and the journal, and how much of a barrier is it? If in doubt, contact the editor and say, look, I know X about this paper. I don't know why. Do you still think that I'm good as a peer reviewer? And then the editor can come back to you and say, oh, great, that's fine. Just say what your limitations are. Or no, actually, thank you for pointing that out. I sent it to the wrong person. I'll send it to somebody else. So your role, ideally, as a peer reviewer is something, what Wyatt I'll call is a peer mentor. You're not expected to know everything, but you can make it clear what you do and don't know. And questions for yourself when you're reviewing. These are central questions. The very first question is, do I understand the methods the person is using? So somebody was talking about systematic reviews. Not everybody understands the methods of systematic review as a form of scholarship. Do I have a good idea of who the audience is for the journal? And can I put myself in the place of the audience? And can I be a representative of the audience? So for example, South African Journal of Science, we're very interdisciplinary. We can get the most brilliant article on astrophysics that only astrophysicists will understand. That is not the audience of our journal. Our journal is much broader than that. So it's the wrong journal for that particular submission. Do I know enough about the content to comment? And have the authors told me enough about the context of the work and where they're working so that I can make an assessment? And if you can answer those questions, it helps you in terms of deciding whether you are the right peer reviewer for this article. But you're not alone. We really need, and we've just seen this in the poll that we've just had, we really need to develop everybody's skills in peer reviewing. Get help from others and give help to others, but make sure that the editor knows that you are doing that. It's important to have confidentiality and respect for authors. And one thing that's not acceptable, some of you may have experienced this, is where a senior academic doesn't feel like reviewing something, gives it to their doctoral student or their postdoc or their master's student, and then puts their name on it. That's not kind of ethical. Remember your rights, remember the rights of the authors, and remember the rights of the journal itself. Consider some options. So if you get asked to review something, you may work with other people as long as the journal knows. There's a question on the chat: how do I get into peer reviewing? Speak to a more experienced colleague or your supervisor and say, I want to get into peer reviewing. So next time you get approached to do a peer review, please, can I help you? If you yourself get asked and you don't feel right doing it, approach somebody more senior or a supervisor and say, will you help me do this peer review? And one thing that I'm very much in favor of is peer review buddy systems, and these can link with writing support systems. So writing groups where you sit and write together, we're in journal clubs together. But a good place to start, even before you do peer reviews for journals yourselves, is if you're in a club with other people and you're looking at one another's work, or you're in a lab together, make a commitment that you and your buddies, people that you work with, will peer review the reviews that you yourself receive from journals. So you'll make an assessment. You've sent something to a journal, you get a review. You and your buddies will say, is this a good review or a bad review? And you'll look at the criteria that we've discussed today in terms of competence, respectfulness, constructiveness, etc., and suggest in your group ways in which the reviews could have been improved. Within peer review buddy systems, it's important that your group work confidentially and respectfully. Look at the journal policies, get permission from the editor of the journal to use a peer review system. I will argue, as a journal editor of a number of journals, would never say no. Then each of you independently look at areas that need to be covered in the review. Distribute those tasks to members of your group. So we know that X person in our group is really good on statistics, and this person is really good on this aspect of this theory, and that person is really good at that. And then put all of that together, review what one another has done, and then assemble a full review. And this is a good idea collectively for you to develop your skills as reviewers. This is carrying on from sort of repeating what's been said before. Be supportive but definitive. Summarize your understanding of the work. Explain your overall impressions. Base your overall impressions on actual content, not on what you like. Indicate strengths and weaknesses, and you should be able to give it evidence for every comment that you make. Provide suggestions for improvement. Be detailed and clear, and explain any descriptors. So if you just say methods are not good enough, that doesn't help anybody. I didn't write this slide. It's copied from Way et al., who I think are very good on these issues. So as a journal editor, it's I really want to make it clear. Keep the process going. Don't undermine it while it's underway, but do give journals feedback on your experience of peer review, good and bad. This is something that Gemma mentioned. And remember, we need more people to peer review, but we also need to peer review. There is a history of not constructive peer reviewing. If any of you are on Facebook, I know that's only for old people these days, but there's an interesting Facebook group called Reviewer 2 Must Be Stopped, which is full of horrific tales of what reviewers say. Don't be like that. So be constructive, make peer reviewing better, because we need a better future for peer review. Okay, so that was a little bit of a rush, but I want to leave time for discussion. So thanks very much, Linda.
Thank you, Leslie, and thank you to all our panelists once again for their presentations. I think we've covered certainly what the questions were asking, and I hope that the participants agree that a lot of their questions have been answered. We do have some time for questions, and I can see the panelists have been busy in the Q&A as well. So there are some that have been answered. I just want to go back and see, I know there were some questions pertaining to how do you become a peer reviewer and where do you start? I think Leslie has covered that, and those have been answered, hopefully covered completely in the Q&A. Just if I see Cynthia has their hand raised, if we can allow Cynthia to ask a question.
Morning, colleagues. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, Cynthia.
Yes, Cynthia, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to check if we are allowed to use ChatGPT in our manuals or even in our research thesis. Is it academically allowed legally? As I've seen one of the comments, one has included that. So I just want to verify if it is appropriate academically. Is it not part of plagiarizing? Thank you.
Linda, is that directed at me?
Yes, if you could answer, Mark.
Well, there I am. Well, I don't know, because it's a question of policy, right? So if the policy permits it, then absolutely go ahead. I think there are three important principles. The one is, where it's not allowed, it's not plagiarism, it's cheating. So it's not quoting another intelligence. It's not really another being. Sorry, let me hold this mic out here. It's violating the rules if it is. Okay, so that's the first one. I think the second principle is that it is very good at things it's seen before, things that are out there. So in terms of writing policies or writing a routine note, a circular, it does that quite well. So if that is within the boundaries then and permitted, then by all means, it's as kind of a time saver. One has to understand all these other ethical considerations. You must understand that there's environmental cost, that there is labor behind this. It's not just a box of magic. So we must do that. But that leads me to the third thing, is we cannot outsource our thinking. And that's the blurred line. So it's one thing to say, I had an example of a friend of mine who is the CEO of a refining gold refining company. He wanted to congratulate somebody who's done a great achievement at work, and he's not a great writer. He knows what he wants to say. You've done a great job. We all like you. Go ahead. But he can't do that. You know, that's an SMS worth of. So, dear ChatGPT, please help me out. I want to say this to a coworker. Here's the letter go. There's no harm done, but the thinking wasn't outsourced, and that's what I think the danger is. But remember that principle of that. What we come back, we have to make sure that that is true, that it's not a hallucination, and that it was the intention. But as to the actual policies, I think everybody is and should be scrambling right now to make sure that we say, for this, in this forum, this is what is permitted, be that an online discussion forum or a student course or the instructions to authors. Let me pause it there.
Thank you, Martin. Very good points there. There's a couple others, unsurprisingly, also about AI, and I think you did touch on them in your presentation, about translational ability of the LLM, and is it restricted to direct translations only? And then another, hopefully quick one, which I think you did answer, but can AI be referenced in academic research?
Okay. Let's do the reference first. So again, I saw it was about 2 months ago that APA came out, and they said that we recommend a reference as a citation style reference. So in text, you know, where one would say sen and the year, you actually say GPT or ChatGPT. or maybe it's OpenAI, I'm not sure. And then that's drops down in the reference list, down the bibliography, as if it was a text that was consulted. I'm not sure that that's necessarily the way to do that, but there are guides around that. And of course, the principle is that you show where you've got other sources. I mean, it's the same rules apply, where you have to be a little creative in how, but it's, you know, the world hasn't changed that dramatically. We just have to be a bit smarter. Right is still right, wrong is still wrong. Does it do direct translation? No. It actually has quite a nuanced approach to translation. So it does understand that if the question is phrased to me in other words, the prompt is written in isiZulu, it then picks up. So it has a rudimentary theory of mind that I want you to answer me back in isiZulu, or in the language of the prompt, using that order of structuring ideas, which is obviously different. Nguni languages to Germanic languages work differently. So it intuitively does that because it's trained on all those examples. So sometimes it's a bit clumsy, sometimes it's a bit ham-fisted, and of course it does better on languages that it's seen more of. So it does, for instance, English to Arabic translation really well, because it's seen lots of Arabic examples. But if you're going to give it Chavenda, or you know, it'll probably do worse. I'm obviously not in a position to evaluate, and they're not sharing their training data. But in essence, no, it's trying to do it in the right conceptual structure appropriate to the language. Let me stop there.
Thank you, Martin. Yeah, we've just got load shedding, so I hope I don't lose connectivity, but I think we have one more time for one more question, Rhoda. If you'd like to ask your question quickly.
Linda, can I just jump in? It's Nati here.
Yes.
Right. I think the question that was asked by the previous speaker on whether you are plagiarizing on artificial intelligence or not, I think I'd like to follow up on that, because I think this is a very interesting and timely question. I think at this time, you know, when there is so much, you know, artificial intelligence going around. But what I want to ask, maybe get some views on, let's say, you know, I'm trying to relate this to, say, for example, what you call this, I can't remember, but can one use artificial intelligence? Say you get information from there about, you want to understand better about a particular topic. Once you get that idea and an understanding, because the idea is to produce knowledge, you know, and so can you then use what you have gathered from artificial intelligence, in other words, to phrase it and contextualize it, you know, in what you are trying to do? So in other words, you are not just taking, but you are trying to conceptualize issues further. You know, would that...
Yeah, thanks, Nati. I think we probably could have another hour's discussion about this. But if I could just give Martin a chance to respond, because we are at 12 and I'm conscious that some people have to leave.
Okay, let me try to do very quick. I think it's a great question. So depends is the answer. So if I'm a school student or you know, younger person, then I'm trying to understand something at high school level or undergraduate level, and I ask it to explain something to me, it will do it very well because it's got a lot of data on that. So if I want to ask it, I want to understand cell division, like biological cell division, it will explain that very, very well. If I'm doing research and I want to, so in my own field of computational social science, for instance, I'm really interested in the correlation or the relationship between inequality, like Gini coefficient inequality, and protest. So I sort of know what's there in the field, but maybe I haven't read every journal on something. If I ask it to explain to me what's going on there, I'm in danger, right? Because I could read hallucinated stuff. It's close to the cutting edge. So if it's something that is actually settled, but I want to find out about that, that's fine. You know, if it's something that's not settled, but I want to find out more about it, that's dangerous. So that's the kind of a shibboleth, and it's a tightrope to walk. So if it's a very simple thing, yes, absolutely. If it's a complex thing, please stay away. And of course, if you do go in that direction, then ask for references and see if those references exist. Often, if you click on it, it will give you a 404. File not found, right? So it's a hallucination. It's made up a reference. It's made up an idea. So it's quite dangerous. So that's the thing. If I want to branch into something and I know that in an undergraduate course, somebody would learn that, yeah, sure, ask for it. But if not, do not do it. And certainly don't read something on ChatGPT and then turn that into a paper. That is that point of outsourcing our thinking. Go and find somebody who's actually said that thing. And we have lots of tools to get that. Sorry for rushing through this. It's a lovely conversation. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Nadia, for that question. And I'm quite sure that we could talk for another hour on AI alone. But we have come to the end of our session. And I want to thank again all of our speakers for enlightening us on peer review. And I hope that whatever you did put into the polls as your answer, if you have changed your mind, or if you have been your answers have been verified, either way, I hope you have learned something. I have learned a great deal today. If any of our speakers want to have one final word, I'm going to open the floor to them. Thank you.
Linda, I'm just going to jump in. Oh, it's lovely to see all these hands clapping. But maybe, Linda, can we just mention our monthly support sessions where people can follow up with this, please?
Yes, so just for those who may be interested, Nadia will share the links. If we hold the journal hosts a monthly journal writing and peer review forum. It's an open forum. Anyone can attend. It's virtual. Any discipline, any career stage, and it's basically an ask and answer session. There's no agenda, and all are welcome. If you are interested in joining that, you can just follow the link that Nadia has posted and put your email address there, and you will be added to the Google group and receive notifications about those meetings. And then also, just as a final word, if we could please get your feedback on this workshop, and Nadia will share a form for you to provide your feedback to us. And then still, if anyone wants a final word, final goodbye, I can, yes. Sorry, Gemma, I don't know if you were waiting to say something or you.
Not really. Leslie stole my comment, but yeah, just to encourage everybody to please go ahead and start peer reviewing, overcome that imposter syndrome if you can. You're much more experienced than you think you are, and we really value your inputs. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you to all the participants and all the speakers once again for joining us. It's been a really great 2 hours. So thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.